was on an airplane that's been hijacked, and things will go well, and I'm looking good. I just want you to know I absolutely love you, and I'll see you later, sir. Bye, Dave.
I remember it like it was yesterday. The moment the world changed.
This indeed was the trigger that transformed the world.
I was in a taxi, driving through downtown Manhattan.
A huge explosion now, raining debris on all of us. We better get out of the way!
Then, the confusion.
It collapsed. The top floors collapsed down.
The smell of jet fuel and burned bodies. Was it Saddam or Osama? I believed everything I was told.
2 airplanes have crashed into the World Trade Center in an apparent terrorist attack on our country.
But what really happened that day?
The official story of 9/11 is a monstrosity. It is an insult to the intelligence.
Time passed. We buried the event in our collective psyche. But has that wound really healed? Should we have believed everything we were told?
The same people that told us there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq when they knew they weren't, those very same people gave us the official story of 9/11.
Exactly 18 years later, I'm going to find out by sitting down for a live broadcast with the expert on 9/11 conspiracies, David Icke.
Problem, reaction, solution. First of all, you create the problem, but you get someone else to be blamed for it. You get the public to react to your problem by saying something must be done, this can't go on, what are they going to do about it? And at that point, they then offer the solution to the problems they have created.
His new book, The Trigger, reveals the truth of what happened that day, and the world will never be the same again.
When you sweep away the layers of propaganda, you start to see the connections and you start to see where it's going. Know the outcome and you'll see the journey.
Uncensored and uncut, the truth will be revealed. The world is changing. Inspiration is everywhere. It has never been so easy to connect, share, and bring people together. We're learning from others and finding the best in ourselves. Challenging our beliefs. Sharing our vulnerability. Overcoming our fears. Transforming ourselves so we can transform the world. How far can we go?
This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is...
This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is David Icke, the English writer and public speaker known since the 1990s as a professional conspiracy theorist, calling yourself a full-time investigator into who and what is really controlling the world. You are the author of over 21 books and 10 DVDs and have lectured in over 25 countries, speaking live for up to 10 hours to huge audiences, filling stadiums like Wembley Arena. Today, you're here to discuss your new book, The Trigger, The Lie That Changed the World, Who Really Did It and Why, which explores your alternative theories on who orchestrated the 9/11 attacks. David, welcome back to London Real.
Thank you, Brian.
Super excited to do this. We are streaming this live. We're trying to get this out to everyone possible today on 9/11. It's the 18th anniversary of those attacks that happened in Manhattan. And I thought I would just kick off the episode and talk about my experiences there that day.
Okay.
And then I kind of want to pass everything over and I want to hear what you've been writing about. I know you have been researching this and this has been on your radar for the past 25 years.
Yeah, I first started researching 9/11 on 9/11
virtually, because up to that point, from 1990, I'd been researching how the world's controlled by a few people, the structure through which it's controlled and what makes that possible, and what the agenda is, and the techniques of manipulation, perceptual manipulation of the public that allows them to get the public on board with what they want to do. And when I heard about the attacks on 9/11, I immediately saw it as an absolute classic example of what I termed over many years problem, reaction, solution. This is a devastating technique of mass manipulation where you create a problem, blame someone else for it, in this case, Osama bin Laden. You tell the public through an unquestioning, pathetic media, mainstream, the version of that problem you want the public to believe. And that's another classic. That's exactly what's happened over 9/11. All this period, Brian, of going around the world, of researching 9/11, I have not yet come across one serious mainstream documentary investigating 9/11 and asking questions about the official story. If that is a coincidence and an accident, then I've got some seafront property in the Midwest they might like to buy. So with problem, reaction, solution, you create the problem, you tell the public the version of the problem that you want them to believe, and you want their reaction. My goodness me, and understandably so, 9/11 is a perfect example. You want fear, you want outrage, you want a reaction of something must be done, this can't go on, what are they going to do about it? And then those who have covertly created the problem and blame someone else, got that reaction, do something, then openly offer the solutions to the problems they have themselves created, which are changes in society, which advance their agenda. And because of 9/11, that's why I call it the trigger. 9/11 was the trigger of a sequence of events still unfolding, which has led to mass murder mayhem in the Middle East, as country after country was picked off, all pre-9/11 listed, by the way, by the people that really did it, and has led to a ever-gathering destruction of basic civil liberties, basic privacy, and the justification of surveillance, mass surveillance on the public. 9/11 changed the world. 9/11 changed the world in a way that the people that really did it, that we're going to get into, wanted the world to change, because it was a classic of what I termed all these years, problem, reaction, solution. And so having seen that, immediately it happened, and especially when they started saying, this is what we must do as a result of it, I started investigating it seriously all the way through the rest of 2001, all the way through the first half of 2002. And I published in September 2002 what there may have been others, I don't know, but from my personal experience, the first major book challenging the official story of 9/11. It was called Alice in Wonderland and the World Trade Center Disaster: Why the Official Story of 9/11 is a Monumental Lie. And funnily enough, I started out with the trigger to do an update on Alice in Wonderland. I thought, all these years on, I'm going to update the book. 2 weeks in, blank sheet of paper. We're off again. We're starting again. And over the last year, little more than a year, of full-time research and writing when I wasn't doing other things, I was writing it partly in hotel rooms when I was on the road speaking. I put together a book. In fact, it's 2 books, Brian. The first half of the book demolishes the official story of 9/11. The second half of the book tells an amazing story which leads to who actually did it and, in many ways, how. And I said to you when we chatted a few months ago, my next book's going to be the most controversial one I've ever done. And you went, what? More controversial than the others?
It's a strong statement for David Icke.
Yeah, it is. And it's going to get a lot of reaction from the public who read it and go, because it already has from people who've had pre-publication copies. They've gone, whoa! And it's also going to get me demonized by the people that I name. So yeah, life's going to be interesting, but then again, that's what life's about, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's what you do. Well, let me talk about that day for me, because I think it'll frame especially the kind of problem that it was, because there was a lot of terror that day. And then I would love to get into the details. And again, we're going to go into everything from Tower 7 to the 4 flights to Osama bin Laden to Iraq to all sorts of other players involved that are still involved in the administration and how it's affecting decisions that even happened yesterday.
Right.
So for everybody here, just strap in, because we're going to cover as much as possible that we
Okay.
can in this book. First of all, this is the 18th anniversary of the event, and I just want to also be respectful to all the people that lost their life that day. I think it was...
I've dedicated the book to them.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. Nearly 3,000 people. I knew some people in the top of that tower because I was in the financial industry who were stuck at the very top. It was a company called Euro Brokers. I knew some people up there. So just want to be respectful of them, and I appreciate you donating or as acknowledging them in the book. Real quickly, it was a beautiful, crisp, sunny day in September. And I was living on Houston between Avenue A and Avenue B, probably a kilometer away from the site. You know, I checked a map, but it's pretty close, 1 or 2 clicks. I was flagging a taxi, going to work. I was working for a kind of a dot-com startup in the commercial real estate business on 8th Avenue and 36th Street. I was catching a taxi, listening to a MP3 player that I think was made by Nike. Apple hadn't done one yet. Completely oblivious to what was about to happen that day. Got into a taxi. We're driving down Houston. I look to my left. There's a big hole in the Trade Center. Looked like about 4 stories tall. And the taxi said, yeah, a plane crashed into the Trade Center. And I thought, didn't that happen in New York once before? Maybe a plane went into the Empire State Building in the 30s. And I thought, that's bad, but it's a little odd. And we went a little bit further. And then he said, another plane's gone in. And that's when both of us, complete strangers, looked at each other in the taxi and realized our reality has just shifted. Maybe our lifetime reality has just shifted. Something major just happened. I start getting calls from my friends on my mobile, start telling me what's happening. Mobile lines go dead. I make my way to my office. I get landline calls from all my buddies in banking who have all the access to the information. They're like, the Pentagon's getting hit. This is happening. And it was a crazy day that unfolded. I was actually in the commercial real estate business. One of our editors went all the way down to ground zero to cover it. We went to the roof and literally watched the towers fall. I had to walk home that day, and we all walked the streets of New York City in an eerie silence because they shut down public transportation. There were F-16 fighter jets scrambled and going down the coast of Manhattan, and everyone walked home almost in silence. It was a really scary day. I remember I had a sprained ankle, and I walked 36 blocks and 8 avenues home. I remember I got a bottle of vodka and went to the roof deck of my apartment and watched the building burn. And that was 9/11 for me. And it was a scary day. And the days that ensued, it's really hard to describe the terror that was happening. Everyone was scared. There were bomb threats in buildings the next day. The anthrax scare hit New York City 7 days later. And no one knew when the next attack was going to happen. And it's hard for people to understand how frightened America was and angry America was. We really didn't know what was going to happen next, and we were in this perpetual state of fear, anger, confusion. So that's what I remember, and I remember military everywhere, David. I remember guys with M16s at the airport. We never saw that before. I remember the smell of what smelled like jet fuel and rotting human bodies. I don't know what it was. Maybe it was other chemicals in the buildings. I don't know what it was, but it was a horrible aftermath. And that's what I remember, you know.
And the point is, going on from what I said earlier, Brian, is what you've just described is an extreme version of problem, reaction, solution, because in the middle of that, you have to get the public in fear. And 9/11, as you've just described, got the American public in a level of terror. And I've done an enormous amount of research over the last 30 years into mind control techniques. And one of the classic techniques of mind control is to get the target in states of extreme fear. that what they do with children, horrific as it may sound, we're dealing with psychopaths, by the way, the psychopaths behind 9/11. They will get them, while in captivity in these mind control projects, to experience their worst nightmare. They'll put them in a pit with spiders. They'll put them in a pit with snakes. They'll make them terrified, because it's a well-known trait of mind control that if you get someone in states of fear and terror, they become suggestible. So you've got a traumatized, quite understandably, American population, which then becomes suggestible to what needs to be done about it. And as I show in the book, the suggestions of what should be done were planned long before 9/11 and have played out ever since.
Where do we start, David?
Well, I think, as I've said in the book, I'm not setting out to say what did happen, although there's a phenomenal amount of information that says and leads us to see in so many ways how it was done. But my point was to show that the official story didn't happen. It's what didn't happen that opens up the story, the conspiracy. And with 9/11, it's some strange thing to say. It's basically like a centipede with loads and loads of legs, aspects, parts of the story. And every single one, as I show in the book, of those legs has an Achilles heel. Something that says, this doesn't make sense, or this can't have happened because of A, B, C, and D. And the biggest Achilles heel of all is Building 7. Most people, well, whether it's still most people, I don't know, but one heck of a lot of people have no idea that 3 buildings fell on 9/11. There was the 2 World Trade Center towers. There was Building 7. Building 7 was owned by Larry Silverstein before he bought the lease, weeks before 9/11, and increased dramatically the insurance in the case of a terrorist attack. Got the lease on the World Trade Center towers, which we can get into later, because Larry Silverstein absolutely needs to be in public view. So Building 7 was a 47-story steel frame building. And it fell at 5:20 in the afternoon on 9/11, having not been hit by a plane. And if you look at it, you can go on the internet, put in YouTube Building 7 collapse. You will see the most obvious controlled demolition you will ever see. The first 2.5 seconds of that building falling were in free fall speed, because what was below, as the top fell, had already gone, because it was a controlled demolition. You see, every now and again, you see on the news, you see stadiums blown up and big towers come down, and they fall. They don't fall over where they can hit other buildings. They fall on their own footprint. It's exactly what Building 7 did. What the official story says, he takes a breath because even I can't believe it. And this is the official government explanation of why Building 7 fell, was because of office furnishings fires, which would never even get close to the heat necessary to destabilize a building. And Building 7 coming down through fire, not even from a plane hit, but from office furnishings, official story, makes it, before and since, in the whole of architectural engineering history, the first steel frame building to fall and collapse because of fire. And as synchronicity would have it, this very week, the University of Alaska, Fairbanks, has produced a report after a 4-year study into asking the question, could Building 7 have fallen because of fire? I cover the interim report in the book. This week, they've produced their final report. And they've said, these are academics and engineers and building people. No way could Building 7 have fallen through fire. So Building 7 is a massive symbol of the lie that is 9/11 because it could not have fallen. And I quote in the book so many different building experts, engineers, architects saying, it's a controlled demolition, Building 7. And there's even, of course, most people won't realize, there are groups of experts in their field, like architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth, pilots for 9/11 Truth, firefighters for 9/11 Truth, a great stream of them that have been created since 9/11 to challenge different aspects of the official story, which makes no sense. And so we have a situation where Building 7 was a controlled demolition quite demonstrably. And you know who told us it was? Larry Silverstein, the owner. He made a big mistake. He was caught with his pants down here. He was interviewed on a PBS, Public Service Broadcasting, documentary about 9/11, not long afterwards, or some time afterwards. And he was describing what happened that afternoon in regard to Building 7. He said, what happened, and I quote him word for word in the book, and you can see it on the internet, you see the clip. He said, what happened was the fire commander came to me and said that Building 7 was unstable. And Silverstein, who made a fortune out of the insurance payout, said, well, you know, there's been such a loss of life that let's just pull it. Means controlled demolition, the building. And he said, and then we sat there later in the afternoon and we watched the building come down. One, that fire commander has never come forward and said, yes, we had that conversation. Never happened. And secondly, there's this little matter. First of all, fire officers do not demolish buildings. Experts do. And secondly, it takes weeks to put the charges in the right places within a building the size of Building 7 for the building to be made to fall on its own footprint in a controlled demolition, which is exactly what Building 7 did. So, first of all, building experts say it's a controlled demolition. And secondly, Silverstein said it is, and describes a story of how it came down, which is absolutely impossible. And I would say this to the mainstream media. Why does it take people like me to ask those questions? Why haven't you asked questions about the blatantly bloody obvious in regard to that alone in the last 18 years? So Building 7 was a lie of massive proportions. Then you look at the Twin Towers. The Twin Towers fell in free fall speed, a mean figure of about 10 seconds. And for some, see, the official story is that the towers fell because the weight of the falling debris above was pancaking and collapsing the building below. Well, hold on a minute. You know, I didn't go to a good school, but I am able to work out that when something pancakes, there's resistance. So how did both towers fall in free fall speed? Because all the resistance below had gone before the debris above actually was able to strike it. But that's not a problem. Not a problem. What you do, Brian, is you get experts in, building experts. You get them to look through the steel and the rubble, and they'll tell you what brought the building down. If there were charges in the building, they will be able to find that. So it's not a problem, except the man in overall charge of the criminal investigation into 9/11 was a guy called Michael Chertoff, a rabid ultra-Zionist extremist who oversaw the whole criminal investigation. In the hierarchy underneath him the decision was made to clear the World Trade Center site as fast as possible of the rubble and the steel in both the Twin Towers and Building 7 and take it to two scrap yards in New Jersey and the New York area. The rubble was taken away by an ultra-Zionist controlled company, and they used GPS tracking for the trucks because they said the contents is so sensitive. Sensitive? When they got it to the scrap yards owned by ultra-Zionist companies, they cut the steel up immediately into short lengths, put them on ships and shipped them out to Asia for smelting to become someone's fridge. And the New York Times, I quote it in the book, it's when you mention, Brian, the people who died and the people who lost loved ones left behind, who I dedicate the book to. Tell me what this means in terms of contempt for those people. The engineers and people that were seeking to investigate how the towers came down, all three of them, were outraged that the evidence was taken away so fast, as it was, by the way, with the Oklahoma bombing of the Murrah building in 1995. And this New York Times article describes this scene. In one of these scrap yards in New Jersey, where the rubble is piled up and the steel is piled up, ready for cutting and sending to Asia, big grabbers are coming down, picking it up, moving it around. And this New York Times article describes how engineers and people investigating what happened on 9/11 to the buildings were waiting for the diggers to pull away, and they were running into the rubble and looking to see what they could find in terms of evidence that would be useful, and then they would run back off for another one coming down. If ever I have described total contempt for the victims both living with it and those who died on 9/11, then that scene is it. So why would a government, military intelligence network not make 9/11 the most painstaking, thorough investigation into a terrorist attack in human history, given what you've very brilliantly described in terms of how people were affected by that? Instead, they want to rush away, get the evidence out of the way so experts can't establish beyond doubt, how those buildings came down. It's an extraordinary story. And every area of 9/11 has this theme of contempt for those who died and loved ones left behind, and efforts to hide the truth of what happened. I mean, how about this? There's a few firsts in 9/11, a few never happened befores, including the suspension of the laws of physics, by the way. Whenever there's an air crash of any kind, the investigators establish the nature and proof of the nature and identity of the plane or planes. And they do this very simply with every crash. They take the parts they found, and every one has a serial number. They then check the maintenance logs of the plane, which every time a part is changed, and there's some called time change parts, which have to be changed in a period, whether they're damaged or not, or worn or not, they have to be changed. And they see that the maintenance log code for that part and the code on the part found at the crash are the same. Every crash does that, because then they know, yes, the identity of the plane. On 9/11, to this day, that has never been done. They have never established, in the simplest way possible, that those 4 planes that left the airports were the ones that hit the building and crashed in Pennsylvania. And I know this for a fact because the FBI had had to admit it. There was a Freedom of Information Act request for the documentation showing that that was done to prove that the planes that left the airports were the ones that crashed. And the FBI replied, that was never done, and the reason why is the identity of the planes was never in doubt. Well, when you read the book, you'll find that the identity of those planes was absolutely fundamentally in doubt in terms of whether they were the same planes. I say they weren't. How about this? Every time there is a hijack, the first thing a pilot has to do is punch in a 4-digit code. Immediately, it takes that long. And on the ground, they realize there's a hijack. Happens every time, except on 9/11. None of those pilots on those 4 planes, none of them punched in the hijack code that day. Like I say, it's never happened before. It's all over this story. And in every aspect and every area you look at, the house of cards comes falling down. And I just repeat again before I just finish this point. If I can do it, then the mainstream media have been able to do it worldwide for the last 18 years. Why haven't they?
Why haven't they? Because they're supported by advertising and the Defense Department, and they don't want to rock the boat.
Well, the greatest form and the worst and most insidious form of censorship is self-censorship, where you know you mustn't cross that line or there's going to be problems. And of course, you can have journalists who, not many in the mainstream, it seems to me, who would like to ask questions, but what goes in the newspapers, what goes on the news bulletin is decided by those that run the organization, not by individual journalists. And so you have a situation where a house of cards that is so blatantly a pack of lies has gone uninvestigated and unchallenged by the mainstream media for 18 years. And that is another insult to those who died and loved ones left behind.
Let's just zoom out a bit, because in the first 2 chapters of the book, you talk about your concept of kind of the spider's web, and then you get into what you call the hidden hand, some of the people that were involved in this whole process. And then I'd love to get in a little deeper into the flights and then,
Sure.
Of course, go deeper into your problem reaction solution system. But for people that don't know, what do you mean by the spider's web?
The question that people ask when people like me talk about a few controlling the world and the direction of the world, to a very, very clear and specific end that I talk about at the end of the book, it's an understandable question. How could a few control so many people? It's not possible, but it is. And you know, when I used to do jigsaw puzzles, I've done one for a long time, but when I did, I always wanted to get the outside frame first, the straight bits, because then it becomes easier to put the pieces in the middle. So when I started uncovering the fact that, yes, a few people do control the direction of the world, I wanted to know how they could do it. And this is the structure through which they do it. Imagine a spider's web. In the center is the spider. That's deep in the shadows. You don't see that. And that's dictating events. The strands in the web immediately around the spider are the most exclusive secret societies. Many of them don't even have names, which makes them harder to track. And as you come out in the web, still in the hidden, you start hitting the secret societies we do know about, but we don't know what goes on in them unless you do serious research. These are the Freemasons, and I'm talking about the inner core of the Freemasons, not Fred and Joe down the lodge, you know. We're talking the Knights Templar, the Knights of Malta, Opus Dei, the inner core of the Jesuit order, and many others. And you come out of the web in that, still in the hidden, and then you hit what I call the cusp. These are organizations that are kind of semi-secret. Thanks to, people like me that do what I do, they're less secret than they were, but they're semi-secret. These cusp organizations, which are organizations like the Council on Foreign Relations in America, which has driven US foreign policy in so many ways since it was formed in 1921. The Bilderberg Group, created in 1954 at the Bilderberg Hotel in Oosterbeek, Holland. The Trilateral Commission, 1972-73, created by David Rockefeller and Zbigniew Brzezinski, Jimmy Carter's national security advisor, who is very much involved in this. He's not with us any longer, neither is David Rockefeller, but they're fundamentally involved in this whole web. And the Club of Rome, which was formed in the 1960s, specifically to exploit the environment as a problem to which a solution could be proposed. And what I said, just a very brief aside, but it's important given current events. What I wrote years ago, decades ago, was that the reason we're having what I call the human-caused global warming hoax, people say, well, why would they hoax? Why would they lie to us about that? Because it is a problem, or in this case, a manufactured problem, to which they can offer a solution. And I said, what the solution is going to be, this is decades ago, is to say that they must have centralization of power over the fine detail of people's lives and lifestyles to save the planet. That's what's coming. And now, of course, it's here. And so you've got these cusp organizations, and what their role is, they pull together people in politics and banking and business and intelligence and media, is to take this, if you like, the spider agenda from the shadows and play it out through into the mainstream arena. And at that point in the web, we're in the world of the scene. We're into governments, government agencies, the so-called deep state, which I've been writing about for 30 years nearly, and now it's common parlance, the deep state. And the banking system, corporations, etc. And you see decisions being made, like with Silicon Valley and all the censorship of alternative information, including that about 9/11. They seem to be random decisions being made in the world of the scene, but they're not. If you go back into the shadows, those random decisions are not random at all. Because if you go back to the spider level, Facebook is Google. Google is Amazon. Amazon is the banking system. The banking system is the biotech cartel, is the big pharma cartel, is government at its core controlling level. And you start to realize that actually this web is what's pulling it all together. And, in terms of 9/11, it's through this web that it was pulled off, with only a very, very few people needing to know about it because of this system that all intelligence agencies use, and funnily enough, secret societies use, of compartmentalization. Example, you look at the Freemasons, the vast majority of Freemasons in the world are on the bottom 3 levels of degree, the blue degrees. That's as far as they get. But in the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, there's 33 degrees, and then there's other degrees above that most Freemasons don't even know about, where the real deal is. And so the vast majority of Freemasons, they have no idea what other levels of Freemasonry know. And this is how intelligence agencies work. They call it the need-to-know principle. Only let people within the organization know enough to do their job, make their contribution, but not enough to know how their contribution fits in with everyone else's to create a very different picture to what the individual contribution looks like in and of itself. And so this compartmentalization means that so many people can contribute to something like 9/11, but they have no idea that their individual contribution is part of it. You know, if you want to hide a technology about actually what it is, you get the different parts made in different areas of the world, different places, different companies. So they're making a part. They don't know what it's part of. The only people that know what the technology actually is are those right at the end, the very few, who put the parts together. Everybody else is in ignorance. What's this for? I don't know. Our mind's not to reason why. Just make it, mate. And this is how compartmentalization works. And it means that very few people need to know to make something like this happen. So if you look at a police force, you have to control very few people in a police force to dictate who is prosecuted, who is not prosecuted, what's investigated, what's not investigated. You only have to control those positions in the police force that make those decisions. All your rank and file police then react to those decisions. Oh, don't investigate him, don't investigate that. And this is how it's done. Very few people have to be aware of 9/11 to make that happen. And that's how the whole web works.
Okay. And what about this thing that you call the hidden hand, where there are these specific people that were involved in making 9/11 happen, in politics mainly?
What I call the hidden hand, to keep it real simple, is this web. And those within the web who actually know they're making a contribution to a specific end that is very bad for humanity. That's the hidden hand, the sum total of this web of manipulation. And the one, it's going to be very, very controversial. I don't care. I'm interested in the truth, not a statue and a round of applause. Thank you very much. Very controversial is where it leads to who actually did it. And I tell an amazing story. This is part of the web, what I'm going to describe, but fundamentally globally important and fundamentally centrally important to what happened on 9/11. In the 17th century, and I'll make this brief, the details all in the book, a man emerged, a Jewish man called Sabbatai Zevi, and he claimed to be the Jewish Messiah. Messiah had arrived. And he gathered behind him a phenomenal following. All the stuff about this in the book comes from Jewish sources who know about this. And he had 1 million followers at one point. We're looking at the 17th century. And he created a cult which inverted everything. This is the whole basis of it. So whatever Judaism stood for, it would invert and do the opposite. And people who want to discredit me are going to say he's saying 9/11 was a Jewish plot. I am absolutely not saying that. In fact, I'm saying the opposite. And that's why I say in the book that no one needs to read this book more urgently than the Jewish community of the world to see how they've been shafted by this inversion. And this cult became known as Sabbateanism. And so if you had a day in Judaism, which was a day of fasting, then in Sabbateanism, it will be a day of feasting. They inverted everything. So if you had a taboo about sex with children, Sabbateanism would not only remove the taboo, it would make it something to be desired, something to do. And the way they sold this in this cult was that the more evil you do, basically the quicker God will come and sort it out. I mean, you know, I know, but that's how they sold it. And this cult eventually led to a point where Sabbatai Zevi was in the Ottoman Empire in Turkey. And he was given a choice by the Sultan to either renege on his Sabbateanism religion and become a Muslim, or he'd get business. And he decided that he would on considering it, I think I'll become a Muslim. But of course, that was only on the surface. And Sabbateanism, and so many were following Sabbatai Zevi, followed Sabbateanism within the apparently conversion to Islam. And these people became known in the Islamic world as the Donma, which means to turn. And one of the things that I show in the book is that these Donma ended up infiltrating the Islamic religion and becoming the Saudi royal family and creating, I explain the background and the history, in league with the British Empire, the Wahhabi form of extreme Islam, which manifests as the Saudi Arabian version and of ISIS, Islamic State. These are creations of the Donma, who are not Muslim, but Sabbateans, a cult, a satanic cult, which, by the way, as I make clear, and Jewish sources make clear in the book, hate Jewish people, hate them with a vengeance. And what this Sabbateanism then became in the next century, the 18th century, was what I call in the book, right to present day, Sabbatean Frankism. And this is because of a man called Jacob Frank, who has been described by Jewish sources as basically one of the most evil people ever to emerge in the Jewish community. Jacob Frank claimed to be the reincarnation of Sabbatai Zevi, in other words, the Messiah, and the reincarnation of the biblical patriarch Jacob. And he took Sabbateanism onto an even greater level of evil and inversion. And every horror you can think of was a good thing and to be desired in this inverted cult. And what it then did was, as it did in Islam, was develop the technique of infiltrating communities and other religions. So Jacob Frank and his Sabbatean Frankists infiltrated the Roman Catholic Church. And they did it by posing as Roman Catholic believers, but really they were Sabbatean Frankists, occultists, what we would call today Satanists. They created Christian Zionism in the southern states, particularly of America, and the vast majority, overwhelming majority of Christian Zionists have no idea that that was the case. And there came a point, again, I'm being as brief as I can, where Jacob Frank, with this inverted satanic religion, hooked up with Mayer Amschel Rothschild, the founder of the Rothschild dynasty, and a Sabbatean Frankist. Not a Jewish person, no, a Sabbatean Frankist. The Sabbatean Frankism religion, or what you call it, cult. And those two then hooked up with a guy called Adam Weishaupt, and together they created an organization called the Illuminati, called the Bavarian Illuminati to start with. And interestingly, this cult, its Bible is the Kabbalah, the esoteric, mystical work of the Jewish belief system. And particularly a book in the Kabbalah called the Zohar. And Zohar means radiance, illuminated, and that's where Illuminati came from. And they then went about from 1776, when it started, infiltrating all these different communities and religions, and they took them over. And it was the Rothschild Sabbatean Frankist cult that created Israel, and is behind, indeed is the Saudi royal family today. is the inner circle of so many of these organizations. And I show in the book in a chapter called
The founders of Israel and the Saudi royal family are linked.
Absolutely.
Which would be shocking to hear for most people.
But it wouldn't if you do the research, because in the background, the Israeli government and the Saudi royal family have been close. And what's happened since the emergence of this utter psychopath called the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, who was involved in this horrific murder of Jamal Khashoggi in Turkey, they have become even close in the public arena in many ways, because they are all basically, if you like, Donma in their different forms. And in the book, in a chapter called Atlantic Crossing, I show how this Sabbatean Frankist cult moved in on America and took over American politics, not least through phenomenal, staggering levels of funding, infiltrated the CIA, infiltrated the National Security Agency, the Pentagon, and from that were able to direct inner networks within these organizations, think compartmentalization, which together were behind 9/11. And what I do in the book, and I'm going to be very brief here, all the details in the book, and there's a lot more about what I'm going to say that I'm going to say now. I have 3 chapters towards the end of the book. They're called Just a Coincidence, ? Just a Coincidence 2, ? Just a Coincidence 3, in which I simply detail the extremists, the ultra-Zionist extremists who were involved before, during, and after 9/11. And it is breathtaking. And before I start, let me say this. The Jewish population of the world is 0.2%. 0.2%. And if you take a mean figure, because they, depending on how you define what a Jewish person is, the mean figure is about 16 million in a world of 7.7 billion. And the people I'm identifying within that community who are not Jewish, they hate Jews, they're Sabbatean Frankists and ultra-Zionists who, not all of them will know about the cult, but they bought the Israel right or wrong belief system. The people I'm naming are a tiny, tiny number within that 0.2% and within that 16 million.
Thousands?
At most, at the core. So let's have a look. I'm going to take you through a sequence. 1979, a guy called Issa Harel was interviewed by an American Christian Zionist journalist. Issa Harel was called the father of Israeli intelligence, Mr. Big. He was involved for a massive amount of time. And he said to this journalist in 1979 that he thought there was going to be an attack by Muslim extremists on your biggest building in New York. And that they would do this because in their philosophy, also in the philosophy of the Kabbalah, by the way, and that whole area of thought, they represent a phallic symbol of America, and it would break the spirit of America, basically, that kind of theme. Also in 1979, a man called Benjamin Netanyahu organized a conference in Jerusalem and then organized another one in '84 in America, focusing on Arabic terrorism and the need to have preemptive strikes on countries to stop terrorism. And also he wrote a book on the same subject and introduced the concept of a war on terror and weapons of mass destruction also came up in the same period. Then in 19 1996, an American Israeli called Richard Pearl, who was had a major Pentagon post during 9/11, with other ultra-Zionists, wrote a document for the then Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, called A Clean Break, in which they called for the removal of Saddam Hussein, basically a war on terror, targeting Iran, targeting Syria, and what have you, Iraq with Saddam Hussein. Following year, in 1997, in America, an organization was formed called the Project for the New American Century. This was a think tank co-founded by two absolute ultra-Zionist extremists called William Crystal and Robert Kagan. And in the Project for the New American Century in 1997, and leading up to 9/11, were Dick Cheney, who would become the de facto president at the time of 9/11 as vice president to the hapless George Bush, Donald Rumsfeld, who would be defense secretary at the time of 9/11, Dov Zakheim, who would be comptroller of the Pentagon, controlling the whole Pentagon budget, Richard Pearl, who wrote the Clean Break document, had a Pentagon post. And also in the Project for the New American Century was a man called John Bolton, who has been in the Bush administration until last night as National Security Advisor. In September 2000, oh, by the way, this group then wrote to the then President Clinton, urging him to basically invade Iraq and remove Saddam Hussein. This was 1998 they did that. In September 2000, 1 year to the month before 9/11, the Project for the New American Century produced a document calling for American troops to, quote, fight and decisively win multiple theater wars, to regime change in a list of countries. And these are all the people I've just named that put this together. A few months after this document came out, they would be in positions of power in the Bush administration and the Pentagon. And the countries they listed were Iraq, regime change, Libya, Syria, Iran, North Korea, Lebanon, and others, including Sudan. Leading, it said, this document, to regime change in China. But this document said in September 2000, this process of transformation, as they called it, in other words, this regime change, would necessarily be a slow one, this is the quote, absent some catastrophic and catalyzing event, like a new Pearl Harbor, that would be a problem that would justify the solution, which was the agenda in this document. These people that wrote that came to power in the Pentagon and the White House in January 2001. And the ultra-Zionist Michael Chertoff was appointed head of the criminal division of the Justice Department, who would then, by that role, oversee the criminal investigation into 9/11, non-investigation actually. And in September 2001, America had what Bush called at the time our Pearl Harbor, the Pearl Harbor of the 21st century. As a result of that, this list of countries started being ticked off. And I quote a New York Times report just after 9/11, revealing that on September the 19th and 20th, a group called the Defense Policy Board, including all these characters, including Richard Pearl, had met to plot the overthrow of Saddam Hussein. This is days after 9/11. This was planned from the start. Then, in 2007, it's a little bit out of sequence, but it's important to say this. A man called General Clark was interviewed on a internet show called Democracy Now! 2007. And he told an amazing story. He said that, and this guy was Supreme Allied Commander of forces, NATO forces at one point. He was involved in the war against Serbia, etc. He said he went to the Pentagon days after 9/11, and he met Rumsfeld, he met Wolfowitz, the Deputy Defense Secretary, who was also from the Project for the New American Century, ultra Zionist. And he went downstairs and he met a general, friend of his. And the general said to him, we're going to invade Iraq. This is days after 9/11. He said, we're going to invade Iraq. He said, are they involved in 9/11? He said, not that we know, no. Why are we going to invade Iraq? Well, no. Anyway, he said, I went away. I came back a few weeks later, by which time America are in Afghanistan. An invasion that had to be, from pure logistics, organized long before 9/11, by the way. And he said, I met the same general. And he said, I said to him, why haven't we invaded Iraq? I thought we were going to invade Iraq. And he said, the general said to me, it's worse than that, sir. He said, well, I've just had this from upstairs, Rumsfeld office. We are going to invade 7 countries in 5 years. What? And he named them. We're going to invade Iraq, regime change Iraq, we're going to regime change Libya, Syria, Iran, so on, North Korea. And so what happened after 9/11 that was in that document in September 2000 was all planned, but it couldn't have happened, they admit it in the document, without 9/11. So what we then had was this series of regime change wars and manufactured civil wars. And they happened under different regimes. You see, this is where the web is the permanent government. The here today, gone tomorrow politicians just come and go. They're for show. So we had Boy George Bush and Tony Blair, another one attached to this web, big time. That's why he does what he does, who oversaw the invasion of Afghanistan. And then they lied about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq to justify an invasion of Iraq to regime change Saddam Hussein. Why did they lie? Because Iraq removing Saddam Hussein was on the list and they had no credible reason to remove him, so they made it up, simple as that. Then they move out, a Republican and what passes for Labour, and in comes a Democrat, Obama, and in comes David Cameron in this country. And they, with NATO, in effect, invade Libya, another one off the list. And then they start the manipulation of Syria that started that catastrophe in Syria. And now Trump's come in, Maverick, and he's been targeting Iran, etc. All on this list. I think he might be starting to just push back on that a bit. Maybe the pennies are dropping with Trump, actually, who's running this show, and it's not been him. So this party political thing is just a mirage. This web is running the show. So who benefits from all this happening? Well, Israel benefits. The Sabbatean Frankist cult that run Israel, which the vast majority of Jewish people in Israel have no idea about, benefits because that's what they wanted all along. That's what the clean break was basically talking about. So let's have a look at this 9/11 that was the new Pearl Harbor, essential to this playing out. How many people know that in 9/11's year of 2001, 200 Israeli people were arrested in America for being part of an Israeli spy ring? 140 before 9/11 and 60 afterwards. Many were posing as art students. How many people know that the centers, particularly one center in Florida, of this spy ring were the same places frequented by the alleged hijackers, including Mohammed Atta, in the same period? How many know that some of these people arrested for being part of this Israeli spy ring actually had homes in the same street as Mohammed Atta, in a place called Hollywood, which was the center of much of what these alleged hijackers were doing and was also the center of this ring? Hello? How many people know that on the morning of 9/11, a lady looked out of her apartment in New Jersey, looking over to the burning tower, the first one, and saw 5 Middle Eastern-looking men filming it, high-fiving and cheering? She took them to be Arabic. She called the police. The police eventually tracked them down. They had traveling around in a white van. They were Israelis. They became known as the Dancing Israelis. They were arrested and kept in custody for 71 days until the ultra-Zionist head of the criminal division of the Justice Department, Michael Chertoff, released them. And how many people know that the same Michael Chertoff released the 200 arrested in the spy ring? And they went back to Israel. These 5 dancing Israelis, 2 of which were known by the police to be Mossad agents, said that they were there to document the event. Well, hold on, how did you know it was going to happen? And under the Freedom of Information Act, pictures that they took of each other that were taken into by the police were released. They weren't the originals, they were photocopied. They were designed to make them look as least relevant as possible. But these photographs showed the location. And one of these photographs, including one of the people known to be a Mossad agent, was taken on September the 10th, the rest on September the 11th, which supports people at the apartment block who said they saw him there with another man talking, quote, a foreign language on September the 10th. So he's there on September the 10th, and on September the 11th, they're there when the first tower was hit, filming it, whooping and high-fiving. The police then went to where these people worked, and it was a Mossad front called Urban Moving Systems, which was headed by a guy called Dominic Suter. Dominic Suter was interviewed by the FBI and said that they were going to return for a second interview. Well, before they could, he's opted and gone to Israel. And so where was this? One mainstream organization, there was 1 or 2 others as well, but one really covered it, and then it was deleted from their archive very quickly. And that, ironically, was Fox News and a reporter called Carl Cameron, who did a series of 4 reports about this. They were excellent. You can find them on the internet, but you won't find them on the Fox News website. You wouldn't after a few days. And he told this story, and I tell it in the book, plus a lot of other stuff about this. So, okay, let's have a look. We've got a spy ring. We've got the dancing Israelis with absolute obvious prior knowledge of the attacks. We have Michael Chertoff, who oversaw the whole investigation and let them go. And now let's look at the World Trade Center. The World Trade Center was owned by the New York Port Authority, and that was utterly controlled by ultra-Zionists. At the time of 9/11, a guy called Louis Eisenberg. friend of Benjamin Netanyahu. He then agreed, for the first time in the history of the Twin Towers, to sell it into private hands, sell the lease into private hands. And he sold it to an ultra-Zionist friend of Benjamin Netanyahu, so much a friend, they used to talk every Sunday on the phone, Larry Silverstein. And his partner in this project, a guy called Frank Lowy of Westfield Malls fame, another friend of Netanyahu. And the person that provided the pressure to sell it into private hands was a guy called Ronald Lauder, ultra Zionist, major at global level, from the Estee Lauder family, who was heading two privatization organizations in New York that recommended the privatization of the Twin Towers. Larry Silverstein bought the lease, and in his own personal contribution was $14 million. As a result of 9/11, he was paid out in insurance $4.5 billion. Soon as they got the lease, they dramatically increased the insurance in the case of a terrorist attack. The person who insured them initially was a man called Morris Greenberg of the insurance giant AIG, who was a friend of Kissinger, a friend of Netanyahu, all these people, usual story. But what Morris Greenberg did immediately, he had secured the insurance and the terrorist insurance for Silverstein, is he sold it on, reinsured it to 24 insurance companies and before 9/11, and they took the hit, not Greenberg. And what you had with the investigation or lack of it was a desperate desire not to get this into court, because then the evidence could be put before people in a public arena. So what they did was came up with a process of compensation for the victims of 9/11. And you would get a payout if you agreed not to take out civil action, basically. That was overseen by an ultra-Zionist called Kenneth Feinberg, a lawyer, who was also the man who oversaw executive compensation payouts, who got them and who didn't, after the financial crash of 2008. So he oversaw the families getting the compensation who didn't agree, who agreed rather not to go into a civil action. But just under 100 families said, no, we're not taking your compensation. We want to know what's happened.
I think I saw a piece on 60 Minutes with him.
Yeah, so then, yeah, and that civil litigation of the 9/11 families was overseen by an ultra-Zionist judge called Alvin Hellerstein and ultra-Zionist a team in his team. And he was described as running a war of attrition against the families to make sure that none of them got to court. And I quoted from the New York Times article in the book where they're saying Hellerstein's just made another decision in the case, which has basically meant that the last standing family in 2011, I think it was, has now said, we're going to have to pull out because we can't win now he's done this. The case between the insurance companies who took the hit and Larry Silverstein about how much Silverstein got was overseen, judged by an ultra-Zionist judge called Mukasey, who later became Attorney General. And Silverstein's claim against airlines that got him a payout of millions was overseen by Alvin Helestine.
Let me guess.
Ultra-Zionist, just.
All right, so it's a big ultra-Zionist web here.
Absolutely. But
Okay.
when I say ultra-Zionist, I'm talking about not Jewish people, not saying it's a Jewish plot. Vast majority of Jewish people, the overwhelming majority, have no idea what's being done, but they are being used as the smokescreen. Because what happens, as we talked about briefly in our last chat, we have, which is run at its core by the Sabbatean Frankist cult, what I call the anti-Semitism industry and the protection racket. And how it works is that anyone who gets close to uncovering any of this and much milder stuff and talking about it is immediately dubbed an anti-Semite, a Nazi, and all the rest of it. And that's the protection racket. And it's run ultimately at its core by this Sabbatean Frankist cult, which hates Jewish people. And this is why, as I mentioned in the last interview, if you're a Jewish person and you are criticizing Israel, this anti-Semitism protection racket will abuse you even more fiercely than non-Jewish people. Because it's not about protecting Jewish people at all. It's about protecting this cult. That's what it's about. And because of compartmentalization, many people in this ultra-Zionist protection racket will have no idea that what they're protecting is actually a cult that they actually don't know about. But this is the cement, this is the spider's web that allowed it to happen. Of course, you've got tremendous ultra-Zionist Sabbatean Frankist control of the American media, which starts to explain why, not least CNN now, which explains why that obvious questions about 9/11 were never asked, and people like me just get abused for actually asking them. And I've just give you some headlines there in regard to the ultra-Zionist Mossad. Oh, there's another thing, too, which needs mentioning. In this sequence of events from Essa Herald saying, they're going to attack your biggest building, the Arabs, in 1979, in 1987, a security company called Atwell Security, which was run by Mossad and other Israeli intelligence agencies, personnel, and was a subsidiary of the Eisenberg Group of Shaul Eisenberg, who was a massive operator within the intelligence and military community on behalf of Israel. He ran Zim Shipping, dead now, but he ran Zim Shipping, and Zim Shipping vacated one of the Twin Towers at no notice 1 week before 9/11 and broke the lease to do so, just as an aside. And in 1987, the ultra-Zionist-controlled New York Port Authority gave the contract for Twin Tower security to Atwell Security. And the man who represented Atwell Security in that deal in America was one of the Israeli intelligence agents that kidnapped Adolf Eichmann in South America and took him to Israel for execution. And who oversaw that Eichmann operation? Issa Harel. And Issa Harel, people that worked with him were involved in this Atwell Security. The reason that Atwell Security lost the contract very quickly is when it was revealed that the president of Atwell Security had used a false name in the contractual affairs contract. He was really a guy called Avram Shalom, who was a major figure in Israeli intelligence, who'd actually been exposed and had to stand down in Israel for ordering the murder of 2 wanted Palestinians by bashing their heads with stones. So that came out that actually this guy, I think he called himself Avram Bendor instead of Avram Shalom, and the contract fell. So the first attempt in 1987 to get control of the Twin Tower security was from Israeli intelligence there.
Okay.
In 1993, which you will be aware of because I think you were there at the time, there was the World Trade Center bombing in 1993.
Yeah. I was in Boston. I was about to go there as my first job at the company across the street, which was called Bankers Trust, and they had to walk down the stairs, and it was that garage bombing, wasn't it? That's what happened.
That's
and
right.
Took out a hotel
at the bottom, yeah.
Yeah.
So as a result of that bombing, which, by the way, as I show in the book, involved the FBI, and it also involved an intelligence agent from Israel. And as a result of that bombing, the ultra-Zionist-controlled New York Port Authority decided we've got to revamp security of the Twin Towers. And they gave the contract to an ultra-Zionist security company called Kroll. In that same year of 1993, when Kroll got that contract, someone else bought into Kroll as a partner, Morris Greenberg, the man who arranged the insurance for Larry Silverstein, friend of Netanyahu. And so Kroll and ultra-Zionists, out of basically orchestrated from Israel, had control of security from then on right through to 9/11. And when Silverstein took over, of course, they had complete control of the building.
Can I ask you about the hijackers? Because we were all told that there were 19 Saudis, I think.
That's right.
That did the hijack.
They were mostly Saudis.
Okay. Yeah, maybe mostly. Under the control, ultimately, of Osama bin Laden.
That's another thing very quickly.
Yes.
Mostly Saudis. Sabbatean Frankist. Control of Israel, not Israelis, control of Israel. Sabbatean Frankist Donma control of Saudi Arabia. No accident.
And most people don't even remember they were Saudis. They think they were Afghanis or Iraqis or whatever. But so you're saying it wasn't Saudis, it was Israelis? Who were the hijackers?
Well, that's an interesting point because there are so many anomalies about the hijacker story. If you take Mohammed Attar, he was called Mohammed Attar in America, but he was known as Mohammed El Amir, a student in Germany, an Egyptian student. And the descriptions of the personality of German El Amir and American Mohammed Attar couldn't be more different, including descriptions of their height, which seems to have several inches discrepancy. We are asked to believe, you see, that Mohammed Attar was the lead hijacker, and he was a virulent Muslim extremist, Islamic extremist of the kind of basically what's become ISIS, extremist, jihadi. I quote in the book his girlfriend in America, a lady called Amanda Keller. And she describes how she lived with Attar in the run-up to 9/11, a place I think was called the Sandpiper Apartments, in a place called Venice in Florida. And she describes, and she's a white American, seriously un-Muslim. She's girlfriend. And people at the apartments, which I quote in the book, confirmed that, yeah, they were together for a time. And she described how Mohammed Attar, Islamic extremist, was often drunk. His favorite food was pork chops. And he was a regular partaker of cocaine. And when he ran out of cocaine, because they followed him one night, they want to see where it came from, he went over to the flying school he was attending in Venice, which was a drug operation, by the way, involving the CIA. Venice Airport was a notorious conduit for drugs coming out of South America, etc. At that time, whether today, I don't know. And he went into the flying school with some people and came out with an armful of cocaine, and that's what happened all the time. This is the Islamic extremist that's supposed to have given his life to the benefit of Allah. We have another hijacker called Hani Hanjour. Hani Hanjour, according to the official story, was the man who flew Flight 77 into the Pentagon, so they claim, with a maneuver in a big 757 that, as I quote in the book, professional pilots that fly 757, 767 say they could not have done, including this extraordinary spiral that he's claimed. This man, Hani Hanjour, was banned 6 weeks before 9/11 from hiring a one-engine plane because he was so useless and dangerous at flying. Where are you, CNN? Where are you, New York Times? Where are you, BBC? Still today, Brian. Yeah, Hani Hanjour, he flew the plane into the Pentagon. That's what you get. You can fly a one-engine Cessna. And this, I go through the hijackers, or many of them, and the idea that, look at the coincidences here. First of all, you are, in terms of Mohammed Attar, going to hijack Flight 11 out of Boston Logan on September the 11th, 2001. So where do you spend the night? Well, you spend the night in Boston, don't you? It's an early flight. No. He and another guy drove from Boston to Portland, Maine, and caught a commuter flight back, which was, if that commuter flight had been that morning of September the 11th, even vaguely delayed, he wouldn't have gotten Flight 11. And we're asked to believe that that's what he did. But, that's the story. And people think that there is security footage, security pictures of Mohammed Attar getting onto Flight 11. No. Guess where, in a world even then, awash with cameras, especially in airports, guess an international airport at that time that had no cameras in the departure lounges? Boston Logan. They say, but I saw a picture of Attar going through security. Yeah. His father says it wasn't him, but the official story is it was. That was at Portland, Maine. And he left the hotel for a 6:00 commuter flight to connect with Flight 11 at 33 minutes to the hour. Or actually less than that, less than half an hour before the plane took off. The person who checked him in at Portland, Maine, said he was sweating profusely and said they're running late. What, for Flight 11? He then goes through security. Just as an aside, the guy who checked him in said they were wearing jackets and ties, while the two that went through security on the picture weren't. And that's the picture that went around the world, Attar. And people think that was him getting on Flight 11. It wasn't. It was getting on the commuter plane. Now, in the middle of the picture of the security camera, alleged, the last place you would put a time code is the middle of a picture on a security camera. It said 5:45 a.m. And most of the media crop that picture so that's the only time code. You'll see in the book, when you show the whole picture, there's another time code at the bottom, which is exactly where you'd put a time code on a security camera, and that says 6 minutes to 6 for a flight leaving at 6 o'clock, confirming what the check-in guy said. They almost missed the flight. Even if it was them, they almost missed the flight. And I rang the head of security at Portland, Maine, because in that period I was calling everyone. I had interchanges with the FBI and the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, and all of them. And I got her on the phone. She was a lovely lady. And I said, why are there 2 security codes on your security camera with ATAR on? She said, it was there. I don't know. I said, well, can you have a look and find out? She said, oh, we haven't got them. Said, the FBI came and took all the camera footage on the morning of 9/11. Right? And she was very surprised that there was, obviously very surprised that there was a time code in the middle. What? And that's another thing. When the Oklahoma bombing happened in 1995, and a guy was executed for it, very, very dubirously. I cover that in the book as well, because it's, in many ways, the Oklahoma bombing was a version of 9/11. In fact, it wasn't a version, it was a mirror kind of technique. The FBI went to the businesses all around the Murrah building, and they took all the camera footage of the security cameras, which we'd never seen. Because he didn't do it alone. If he did it at all, he had another person with him who's never been found, who's known as John Doe 2. So on the morning of 9/11, the FBI pull the same trick. They confiscate all the security camera footage that had anything on them that would give you information about what happened on 9/11. Do you know, the Pentagon is the most, or at least one of them, probably the most protected buildings in the world. In and around the Pentagon are 85, and we're in 2001, 85 security cameras pointing out in all directions. The FBI confiscated that footage, and we've never seen it. So when people say, did a plane hit the Pentagon or not, I say it didn't. I explain why in the book, but anyway. Oh yeah, no, that's a conspiracy theory. Yes, it did. Well, show us the footage then. Show us the footage. Are you telling me that of 85 security cameras at the Pentagon, there are none of them that actually caught an indisputable footage of the plane hitting the Pentagon? Something else. I could speak forever about it because there's so many Achilles heels in this story.
Who hijacked these planes? Or were they hijacked?
They were, I explain why I say that in the book. They were not the planes that left the airports. They were military enhanced planes that were flown by remote control. And have you heard of something called Operation Northwoods?
Sounds vaguely familiar.
Right. Well, Operation Northwoods was basically, in so many ways, 9/11 in 1962. At the time, in 1962, the American military, Pentagon, and politically too, wanted rid of Castro in Cuba. So the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the military command level of the Pentagon, which was fundamentally also involved with 9/11, they put this plan together called Operation Northwoods. Ladies and gentlemen, see if you recognize this. The plan was, it was the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff was a guy called Lemnitzer. And this is not me pulling it out the ether. I am quoting here the official record from the official American archive. It was most publicly revealed by a guy called James Bamford, a former investigative producer for ABC, in a book he wrote, which was published in the summer of 2001, before 9/11, called Body of Secrets, which was about the NSA. And in the writing of this, he uncovered these documents, which had come to light here and there before, but not as publicly as through this book. This is Operation Northwoods. This is official American documentation. The plan was in 1962, during the Kennedy administration, just before he was assassinated, and Kennedy put a stop to it in the end when he found out about it, it seems. The plan was for the American military to set up terrorist attacks in major cities, New York, Miami, others, to sink American shipping. And this is the most relevant to 9/11, to have a plane flying from a commercial airport on the East Coast that would take it in its normal route across, at a high altitude, obviously, Cuban airspace. This plane, Operation Northwoods documents say, would be full of, this is the quote, carefully selected passengers with carefully selected aliases. The plane would take off, and over Florida, a military CIA plane of the same type, painted in the same airline colors, a drone, 1962, would take off from Eglin Air Force Base in Florida, would get close to the original plane, so basically the dots started to merge, and the drone would be flown on the route over Cuban airspace, and with the passengers, that plane that took off from the airport in an absolutely scheduled flight would be landed at Eglin Air Force Base and the passengers removed. Note how few passengers there were on those planes on September the 11th for what would have got to business time in the West Coast.
But people did die on those flights.
They probably died, but not necessarily by the planes hitting the building. That's another story I go into in the book. It's a lot of background necessary for that. But the point being that these documents said that this drone, without a pilot, would be flown in the colors of the airline and the scheduled flight. When it got over Cuban airspace, they would explode the plane by radio signal. And it even says in the document, and we won't report it, we will wait for the international aviation authorities to tell us that it's happened so that there's more credibility that we didn't know about it. And the idea was, problem, reaction, solution, was to blame it on a ground-to-air missile or a plane from Cuba and justify an invasion of Cuba as a result of that. All these years later, in 2001, basically Operation Northwoods, much expanded, played out in America and justified what? The invasion of country after country in the same way they wanted to use that as an excuse to invade Cuba. Another thing is that if we take the Pentagon alone, of course, buildings like the White House, the Capitol Hill building, and the Pentagon, they're no-fly zones. Why wouldn't they be? How can you protect buildings like that if planes can just fly in there without being challenged and then do what is claimed to have happened to the Pentagon? So it's called P-56. And what happens is when you enter that no-fly zone, especially you get into the inner cores of it, if you're not broadcasting the codes that allow you into that space, then you will be shot down. And I quote in the book a former defense secretary in America, Caspar Weinberger, who said that there are a ring of air bases around Washington, and if anyone threatens Washington from the air without broadcasting the code, then they're shot down. Another thing, I'll come to that a bit more in a second because it's very relevant. Another thing is that there's ground-to-air missiles protecting that no-fly zone as well. You mean there's not ground-to-air missiles protecting the Pentagon? I was approached by a guy in Australia just after 9/11 who was explaining how he has a role in the computer defense system of Australia. And he actually took me to the Canberra Parliament building and said, around here are ground-to-air missiles. You never see them. But anyone comes into this protected airspace and threatens to attack the Parliament building, they'll get shot out of the sky. No warning. If they've not punched in the code that allows them in there, gone. That doesn't happen in America. It's been shown that it has. And people that I quote have said, yeah, the ground-to-air missiles.
So it's suspicious that a plane could get anywhere near
it. Shouldn't get anywhere near it. Now, the organization that is designated to protect America and Canada from the air is called NORAD. And its headquarters is at the Peterson base in Colorado, and not far down the road, about half an hour, 45 minutes in a car, is Cheyenne Mountain, which is its operational base. Cheyenne Mountain, even in 2001, was the state of the art of tracking and reaction to things like this. And they have centers, NORAD, all over to react to situations in that area. The one relevant to 9/11 is called NEADS. It's at a place called Rome in New York State. And it is the one that reacts to these things like hijackings and gets military planes in the air to go up there and see what's going on, and also to try to force the plane down. And if it's threatening a civilian area, to shoot it down. In the year before 9/11, 125 times this happened, because what I quote in the book are the Federal Aviation Administration regulations for air traffic controllers, civilian air traffic controllers, in reacting to problems with a plane. And it says very, very clearly in the regulations, if you lose contact with a plane, or if something is happening that you think is strange, always treat it as an emergency. In other words, you contact NORAD, NORAD gets military planes in the air. So what happened on 9/11 is that this system was suspended for some reason. And in a period of some 2 hours while this was playing out, not one single military plane was scrambled that made any difference to events. First of all, for the first week after 9/11, the official story was that no planes were scrambled at all in that period, which is completely unprecedented. And then after a week, the story changed, and suddenly, yeah, oh yes, we did, because, I mean, not scrambling them at all. It's like, what? Oh yeah, we did, because the story's constantly changing when they get caught out in the first one. And they said that they scrambled planes for the New York attack from Cape Cod, 153 miles away from New York. There's no one closer. And they said that for the Pentagon attack, they scrambled from the Langley base in Virginia, 130 miles away. And neither of them got there anywhere near close enough to make a difference because of the time they were scrambled. In fact, we are told to believe, according to the official story, that the Langley planes, instead of heading for the Pentagon, this is after the World Trade Center has already been hit twice, they went out to sea thinking they were being scrambled for an attack coming in from Russia or somewhere, which they were used to during the Cold War. So they went out to sea before coming back, and they didn't get there in time. And there is a constant theme of 9/11 of personnel like Cheney, like Rumsfeld, like Richard Myers, the acting head of the military that day, and others, Ralph Eberhart, the head of NORAD, not being in a position to respond until the Pentagon was hit, or said to be hit. This was a constant theme. They had cover stories, lies. I prove it, their lies in the book, of where they were up to that point, where they weren't.
So they wanted it to be hit.
Oh yeah, of course.
Because you'll get a bigger reaction.
The plan was, it's like a guy called Fletcher Prouty, who was a major person of experience within the intelligence community. He wrote books exposing the Kennedy assassination and all that stuff. And he said, if you're looking at an assassination, and the same with 9/11, look at who had the power to call off the usual security response, because that's where it's going to lead you to what's behind it. So we've seen all these things that didn't happen that day that should have happened. Now,
who's the most person in charge that day? Cheney?
Cheney was officially, because look what they did with Boy George Bush. They got him down to Florida and then flew him around air bases until 7 o'clock in the evening. They wanted him out of the way.
So he was completely not even in D.C. until 7 o'clock.
No, he wasn't. And that was purposely done because then Cheney could run the show without any interruption. I have a lot to say about Cheney in the book. But the thing is, 130 miles away from the Pentagon. So there's a no-fly zone over Washington. You police it from 130 miles away? What? 10 miles down the road from the Pentagon and the White House is the Andrews Air Force Base. The Andrews Air Force Base is where Air Force One comes in and foreign leaders come in and then get helicoptered to the White House. They do not have planes on standby to react 10 miles down the road to the no-fly zone over Washington. After the Pentagon was hit, as was widely reported, planes were scrambled from the Andrews Air Force Base to protect other attacks of Washington. Why weren't they before? Because it had to be allowed to happen. Now, here's another kicker. I quote in the book tapes of NORAD tapes of the people that were there in the needs base in Rome, New York State, to respond to what was happening, right? And there was total confusion. You can see it on the tapes. This is why. What are the chances, Brian, on that day of all days, that what was described as an unprecedented number of war games were going on in the skies where the 9/11 planes were hijacked, playing out practice scenarios? There was a long list of them, I list them in the book, of planes being hijacked, including one scenario which was a plane hitting the National Reconnaissance Office in Washington, D.C. And what happens when these war games are going on is those that are tracking the planes have something they call sim over live. These are simulated planes as part of the war game scenario that appear on the screens of those tracking planes that really exist. And there's in one of the NORAD tapes, someone shouts out, "Get rid of the goddamn sim," because they were totally confused. And when the reports came in to NORAD, they're all on the tapes, the official tapes, and I quote, of the 9/11 hijacks, the response team at NORAD Needs was saying, is this real or is this scenario, basically? And they were, some of them have said, well, when it first happened, we thought it was, someone actually says, well, they've started the war games early, basically, words to that effect. And it confused everything. And therefore, at one point, while the hijackings were going on, they had a long list of planes they thought were hijacked, weren't hijacked at all. So that created constant, total confusion. The man who decided that that unprecedented number of war games would go on at that day, at least the person who made the decision, was Ralph Eberhardt, the commander of NORAD, who 12 hours before the 9/11 attacks put the Pentagon defense computer systems on the lowest level of protection. And the man in overall political charge of the war games, Dick Cheney.
Should we talk about Dick Cheney?
Oh, that's that length. And one other thing I should mention, by the way, so we don't miss it, when I'm talking about that ultra-Zionist list of people involved, the 9/11 Commission was run by its executive director, a man called Philip Zelikow, an ultra-Zionist who had written before 9/11 and his commission about warning about Arab attacks on and terrorist attacks on American buildings and weapons of mass destruction, all that stuff. He ran the show, and as I show in the book with sources, he and another guy wrote the final report of the 9/11 Commission, or laid it out, including headings and subheadings and all that stuff, before the commission had even first met. And the chairman of the commission, a guy called Thomas Keane, actually said publicly that the 9/11 Commission was set up to fail. Let's look at the background. First of all, you've had these horrific terrorist attacks in America. Again, as with the buildings, what you want, surely, if you care, is the biggest, most painstaking investigation in American history. What happened was that Bush and Cheney resisted an investigation at all. And then public pressure came, and he made the head of the investigation Henry Kissinger, right? Henry Kissinger, ultra Zionist, who, well, basically, I mean, it's like it's like putting the poacher in charge of investigating poaching, basically. I mean, it's the last person you would put in charge of that. And the public reaction responded in the same way. This is ridiculous. So Bush and Cheney and Kissinger stood down. Bush and Cheney had this other group, but it was dominated, even as the mainstream media have written, by this guy, Philip Zelikow. Not only was an ultra-Zionist connected to the same network I'm talking about, but he was also a big-time Bush administration insider. He actually wrote a book with Condoleezza Rice, the Secretary of State at the time of 9/11. Now, when you read the 9/11 Commission report, it is absolutely disgusting. anything that challenges the official story doesn't get in there. Do you know, we talked at the start of this chat about the Achilles heel of all Achilles heels in 9/11, Building 7. Had a big problem. The 9/11 Commission had a big problem. How do you explain 9/11 and the Building 7 collapse? You can't really say, although the official story is this, that it was office furnishings. It would get taken apart if it appeared in the report. They never mentioned it. The whole of the 9/11 Commission report, the third building to fall, is not mentioned. There's something else that's not mentioned among many other things. At the time of 9/11, the Bush administration had a transportation secretary called Norman Mineta. And he told the Commission of his experience on 9/11 when he was inside a bunker under the White House with Dick Cheney and others. And he described a situation that he experienced where they alerted the fact that a plane is heading for Washington. If we take the official story that Flight 77 hit the Pentagon, the plane flew 40 minutes into the Midwest before turning round and coming back, right? And only at the last minute was there any acknowledgement that there was a plane heading for the Pentagon officially. If you are a professional hijacker, what these people were supposed to be, what a joke, you know the NORAD reaction times to hijackings. You're going to take that plane off from Washington Dulles, and you're going to head for the Pentagon because you know you haven't got much time. 80 minutes that plane was in the sky, no military reaction. Anyway, Mineta tells he's in the bunker and Cheney's there. And he said this young man, as he describes him, military, came in and he was counting Cheney down about a plane coming in towards Washington, like, 50 miles, 40 miles. And when it got real close, Mineta said, this lad said to Cheney, "Sir, do the orders still stand?" And Cheney, being the brutal man that he is, reacted, of course, aggressively, saying, "Have you heard anything different?" Words to that effect. Of course, the orders are not changed. And then the Pentagon was, quote, hit. So the orders were clearly not to take the plane down, shoot the plane down. Not that there was anyone up there to do it anyway. The orders were clearly not to take the plane down. So this story is told to the Commission by the Transportation Secretary in the Bush administration. Never got in to the 9/11 report because it's a total scam to stop the truth coming out. Everywhere you look, Brian, it's a joke.
I can see all the little legs and the Achilles heels. Couple questions. I want to get to Osama bin Laden at some point as well. The people in the planes that died, how did they die? Were they in the plane? The phone calls from the planes. There were people that did, civilians that passed away in this tragedy, right? They were in the planes or not.
Well, it's a question of where they passed away. You see,
are you saying those planes were subbed out and they were killed?
Just remember Operation Northwoods. They were going to land the planes at an airfield. Not sure they would want people on those planes to survive and tell the story. And there were war games going on, right? And in war games, they have actors playing parts in the war games. When I mentioned earlier about the National Reconnaissance Office and the scenario of a plane hitting that building in the war game scenario in Washington, they had smoke, bombs. People at the Reconnaissance Office had scripts to keep to. People at the Reconnaissance Office were given phone calls to make it seem like it was a real scenario. There is a very good chance, I'm not saying this is what happened, but there's a very good chance that these war games and those planes were in some way connected. But those planes were landed, and other planes took over. And because of the sim over live, very easy to lose the plane, especially when the transponders are turned off, which gives the a detail of where the plane is and all that height, everything. But in terms of that whole scenario with the phone calls, I go into that.
And Flight 93 was the fourth one that crashed
in the field,
one, yeah, right?
In Pennsylvania. But first of all, at least some of those phone calls couldn't have happened. And if some of them didn't happen, the question is, did any of them happen? And when I say didn't happen, maybe we're not the people involved, or maybe there's some other explanation. Let me explain what I mean. Barbara Olson was a CNN contributor in Vision, and she was the wife of Ted Olson, the Bush administration Solicitor General, who was in the Justice Department that morning. And the official story is that Barbara Olson called her husband at the Justice Department twice, and they had a conversation. Well, no one's ever produced the records of those calls, and the evidence is that they don't have it because it didn't take place. The story that Olson tells kept changing from she rang on an airphone, which were in the back seats and used to pick them. I used one once around the same time, funnily enough. And you could call from the air through these airphones. And the other thing was cell phones. So Olson's gone between, she called on an airphone, she called on a cell phone, right? Two things. At the height she was, according to the flight data recorder that was released to pilots for 9/11 Truth by the authorities, she could never possibly have made a cell phone call from the height that plane was at. So, must have been an airphone. According to American Airlines, that's what Flight 77 was, the airphones were taken out or dismantled by the time of 9/11 on 757s of American Airlines. That's in their own manual saying that. I've quoted from their manuals. Pilots and cabin staff have said the same. Oh no, there were no airphones on 757s at that time on American Airlines. We're on United Airlines, not on American Airlines. Then you have a story of a passenger on Flight 93 calling his wife, a man called Tom Burnett. And his wife said that when the call came, his cell phone came up, right? So he's calling on a cell phone. And they had a conversation. And one of the things, as I explain in the book, that is a constant theme of these phone calls is people at the other end saying it was just incredible how calm they were. And I never heard any panic, any shouting. Often I didn't really hear a plane. It was silent at the other end. Anyway, the FBI was saying that these cell phone calls were made from these planes, right? And then someone, didn't take a lot of now, mainstream media didn't mention it, mind. Sorry, I repeat myself. They pointed out you certainly couldn't then, make cell phone calls from the altitudes they were talking about. Absolutely impossible. So suddenly the FBI story started to change and they became airphones instead of cell phones. And Burnett's calls to his wife, when his cell phone comes up, suddenly became an airphone. It wasn't. And another guy called, and by the way, at the time, those calls were made by Burnett. According to the flight data recorder, Flight 93 was flying at between 34,000 and 40,000 feet.
That high?
Yeah. So
explain. I thought it was getting close to the field and they made the calls when it was a low altitude.
No. that's where, if you take the pilots for 9/11 Truth have done this and shown that at the point those calls were made, if you take the time they were made against the flight data recorder, that's the kind of heights that this plane was flying at. So it's impossible for him to make a call. Another guy, Todd Beamer, the man of Let's Roll, the whole Let's Roll story, which, as I show in the book, almost certainly wasn't said.
What's the Let's Roll story?
You know, when on Flight 93, the official story is that the passengers decided that some of the passengers said they were going to fight the hijackers for control of the plane. And this guy, Todd Beamer, what's claimed to be Todd Beamer, was on the phone to a Verizon airphone supervisor called Lisa Jefferson for a very long time. And she said it was absolutely amazing because that day, airphone calls were going down every few seconds or every few minutes. And yet his stayed on. And not only that, after the plane was supposed to have crashed, the line remained open to Lisa Jefferson, she says this herself, for some considerable time after the plane was supposed to have crashed, because she said when the line's broken, you get a very clear tone that says the line's broken. Never broke. And the airphones get their power from the aircraft, which they wouldn't have done if the plane had crashed. But anyway, the cell phone of Todd Beamer made 19 calls after Flight 93 crashed, or we're told it did. Everywhere you look, this story falls apart because it is a tissue of lies designed by a death cult, satanic death cult, peopled by psychopaths. And the biggest trait of psychopathic mentalities is lack of empathy. Imagine the deletion of empathy required to do that to America, to do that to the loved ones of those people, for a political satanic end of killing even more people in the Middle East year after year after year ever since. We are looking at one of the greatest crimes in human history, certainly in American history. In American history, absolutely. No one has gone to jail for it. And the people that were involved in it, in the cover-up, in the orchestration of it, are all going about their rich lives unmolested, while 3,000 families grieve for the rest of their life. It's infuriating.
Bothers you?
It bothers me. It bothers me because it's infuriating. It bothers me because the same people today and the same networks today are orchestrating mayhem all over the world, including every day moving closer and closer to the total control of humanity via AI connection to the human brain. These same people that are behind that, the same people, networks that are behind the hysterical explosion of censorship of alternative information in Silicon Valley, are all the same people. You look at who controls Facebook, Zionists. Who controls Google? Zionists. Who controls YouTube? Zionist, owned by Google. And these are the people that are shutting down the circulation of information to expose what the same networks are doing. And so what I've done with this book, because, you know, if you care about truth, then you don't care about consequences, because if you care about consequences, you won't deliver the truth, because you'll be saying, this is what I know has happened, and I know I should put this out, but what are the consequences for me? Considering consequences are a prison that allows these people to do what they do, because their currency of control is intimidation. So I wrote the book I know what the reaction's going to be from the very networks that I'm exposing. He's anti-Semitic. He's saying it's all a Jewish plot, which, as you know, is exactly what I'm not saying. Jewish people, the Jewish community must read this book to see how they've been shafted, not just in this, but across a great range of things by this Sabbatean Frankist death cult. And they can throw at me what they like. And it's not impossible, Brian, I say this towards the end of the book, it's not impossible that they'll set up some attacks on a Jewish target and blame the person that did it, or it was that David Icke book that inspired him to do it. That is not impossible, because that's how these people work, to demonize and to get the book off the market. We must ban this book. Look what it's making people do. All this stuff is exactly how they work, and people need to be aware of this. But what happens to me doesn't matter. I am an expression of infinite awareness, and I'll continue my eternal journey of exploring forever, whatever happens to me. What I care about is that this death cult no longer controls the direction and the destiny of planet Earth and the human family, including Jewish people, by its beyond description extreme psychopathic nature, which means it has no empathy, thus no emotional consequences for whatever it does, thus there are no limits. And so if people say, and this is one of the reactions, no one would ever do that. No, you would never do that. The next lady walking down the street would never do that. These people would do that, and not only that, they'd get sexually high from doing it. That's how they work. And so what happens to me is irrelevant. What happens to human society is what I care about. I'm 67. You know what I mean? I could just walk away and live my life out. But I look at my grandkids, I look at my kids, I look at other grandkids and other kids, I look at the young generations and the not so young generations, and I see what's coming for them, orchestrated by the very same death cult that was behind 9/11. And I will not rest until I've done every possible thing I can to expose them, whatever the effect of me, so we've got a chance of bringing an end to this nonsense. Because if we don't, then what Orwell thought about and wrote about is a tea party compared with what these people have in mind.
So fast forward 18 years from 9/11 till today, how has this group transformed? They're no longer shooting planes into buildings. They've taken this to another level of this problem, reaction, solution. The stuff that we've talked about the last couple episodes, right? It's gone to kind of a different level, right? Or what? How do you rate what they did over the last 18 years? Did they get what they wanted?
They got most of it. They didn't get Syria, certainly yet, because Russia came in. If Russia hadn't have gone, Syria would have gone. It hadn't come in, Russia would hadn't come in, Syria would have gone. It was a very interesting development overnight as we're speaking. And that is that Trump's national security advisor, John Bolton, he says he resigned, Trump says he fired him. I'm more inclined to believe Trump on this one. And John Bolton was one of the people involved in the Project for the New American Century in September 2000, when they wrote that document listing the regime change countries they wanted and saying we need another Pearl Harbor to justify it. And since then, of course, John Bolton's never seen a country he didn't want to bomb. And he is a very close associate of a man called Sheldon Adelson. Sheldon Adelson is a Las Vegas casino multi-billionaire, an Israeli-American who owns media in Israel, associate of, indeed, beyond, above Benjamin Netanyahu. And he's Trump's biggest funder and the Republican Party's biggest funder.
Gave him millions of dollars.
Oh, yeah. Amazing amount of money. Just as George Soros is a major funder of the Democratic Party. Control both sides, you control the game. And so Adelson represents Israel, basically. He said, I quote him in there as saying, the only thing that really matters to me is what's good for Israel. Right? And so he wanted Bolton to be in as national security advisor. And I'm no Trump supporter. I mean, I think that can be fair. I'm a supporter of none of these political parties. They're all a diversion and irrelevance.
Is Trump part of the satanic death cult?
He is a pawn of it, which is different. I mean, I don't know what level it will go, but he's a pawn of it. Now, I'll tell you where I'm going with this. I've said in this book, and I've said in a previous book, my previous book, I think that for all his faults, and he has many, and his narcissism and all the rest of it, Trump genuinely would rather talk than bomb countries. And so what he's done, he's been under tremendous pressure from the ultra-Zionists that ring him and the Christian Zionists like Pompeo, his Secretary of State, and Mike Pence, his Deputy President, and Bolton. He's not a Christian Zionist, but he is a front for the Israeli extremists. Trump tried to talk to North Korea. Who scuppered that, at least up to now? Pompeo and Bolton. Because the idea, North Korea was on the list, the Project for the American Century, for regime change. They don't want talk that might come to some agreement and rapport. He talked Trump in his election campaign in terms of wanting to get closer to Russia, because I don't think he genuinely sees the point of antagonism with Russia. So the moment he became elected, this Russia collusion hoax was perpetrated, which lasted years. It's just basically blown out now through lack of evidence. And so in this period, Trump has not got closer to Russia, because if he did, see, proof, he's Putin's puppet. He wanted to pull troops out of Syria, if you remember. Mm-hmm. And then your Boltons and your Pompeos and that ultra-Zionist network were like responding against that. You can't do that, you can't do that. And he actually did an interview, I don't know whether you saw this, on mainstream television, just after he'd announced that he wanted to take troops out of Syria. And he said, I don't know, you want to take troops out of Syria? And everyone's kind of coming in to say, you can't do that, you can't do that. This is the cult. Because they want Assad gone. They don't want troops being pulled out of Syria. And then very recently, in the last few days, he's talked about peace talks with the Taliban in Afghanistan. And of course, that got knocked on the head. He seems to be moving towards maybe face-to-face talks with the leaders of Iran. This is the last thing that your Boltons want and your Netanyahus want. They want war with them. And so it reached a point, I'm not surprised. I've actually been waiting for it. I've been thinking over the last few weeks, how long can Trump take this without reacting against it? And it seems he came out, Trump, overnight and said, I just basically disagreed with so many things that John Bolton wanted me to do, which was actually war, not jaw. And we'll see if Trump is genuine about pushing back on this death cult, as I call it, by who he replaces Bolton with, and whether he does now say, hold on a minute, I'm going to talk to these people. I'm not going to talk the language of war. Because if you remember, only a few weeks ago, Trump, with Bolton at his side, came within minutes of launching a missile attack against Iran. Because that's what the Israel death cult wants, and it's what its representative in government, Bolton, wants and Pompeo wants. And Trump, if you remember, decided at the very last minute he was going to pull back and not do it. And so there's been
that was
this
over that drone attack, right?
There's been this
Hormuz, right?
There's been this clear tussle, and where it goes from here, we'll see. But Trump is under tremendous pressure because his basic funding comes from Adelson and those same sources. and he's got an election coming up. So we'll see where it goes from here. But
that's like kind of a chink in the armor. You can see that someone's pushing back against the Illuminati in there.
Because I'll tell you this, I know from my own sources, information, that there are many people within the government of America, within the military and intelligence community of America, who know that what I've just said in this interview is true. They know about the death cult. They know that Mossad and its military, etc., is massively involved in 9/11, and is massively has been dictating the events in the Trump administration. And they are pushing back as best they can against it. And the more the merrier, because we need to bring an end to this, because it's going to take us down a road of a devastating future if we allow these insane people to continue to control events.
What didn't we cover in here? I know I mentioned Osama bin Laden. What else do you think is super relevant that we mention about what you put out in this book? Do we go deep enough into Cheney?
Oh, I go into Cheney.
There's a recent movie about him called Vice that's interesting to watch.
Cheney is a brutal psychopath, and the evidence I put in the book, because there's a chapter early on in which I look at some of the players. Because you see, Brian, one of the biggest defense systems that what is happening is public incredulity that someone could be that evil. They would never do that. I mean, there was a mainstream journalist who claims to be progressive, I quote him in the book, who said that these conspiracy theories, as they're called, about 9/11 are just nonsense, because George Bush is not that intelligent, not that ballsy, and not that evil. And you sit there and you go, this is a mainstream journalist. And you think that something like 9/11 was orchestrated by Boy George Bush, who said that humans and fish can coexist peacefully, that takes lessons in tying his shoelaces. I mean, what? It's ridiculous. But still, the mainstream mind says Bush was president, therefore he must have been orchestrating it, because he's top of the hierarchy. These are here today, gone tomorrow puppets. It's deep in the shadows that it's orchestrated from. So this incredulity of they would never do that, what they're actually saying is no one would do that. Well, one of the early chapters before I really hit 9/11 looks at the background to Father George Bush, Boy George Bush, Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, and others. And when you see their background, people will realize they would do that. And let me tell you something else, Brian, just maybe as we come to a close here. Something you say, other relevant things. Here's a relevant thing. I mentioned that there is a common theme of people providing themselves with cover stories until the Pentagon was hit, particularly then, some for later. Well, the acting head, who then became the head shortly afterwards of the uniform level of the military in the Pentagon at the time of 9/11, was a man called General Richard Myers. Richard Myers is a liar about what happened to him on 9/11. And let me explain what I mean by that. And then I'll come to Rumsfeld, brackets, ditto. Myers told in Army radio and other places and sources that on the morning of 9/11, when all the war games are going on, which means the Pentagon will be full of generals running the war games. Oh, not Richard Myers, who was acting head of the whole military at that time at uniform level. He was on Capitol Hill having a meeting with a guy called Senator Max Cleland about some hearings coming up. He said that just before he went into the meeting, someone said a plane's hit the World Trade Center. And so he kind of, he hit the World Trade Center. Okay. So what do? You're the head of the military at uniform level. He goes into the meeting with Max Cleland. A second plane hits the World Trade Center. No one tells the acting head at uniform level of the military, he says. He then says he comes out at the end of this meeting, having not been told about the second plane, and as he came out, someone shouted, "The Pentagon's been hit." So all the way through, until the Pentagon's hit, Myers has the cover story. He's at a meeting with Senator Max Cleland on Capitol Hill. I'll come back to him in a second. Donald Rumsfeld's story, told to Larry King on then CNN. I watched it myself at the time, jaw dropping. He's the defense secretary. He's basically second in line commander to the president. He said that at the time that Flight 11 was leaving Boston Logan, he is sitting in his office at the Pentagon and he's having a breakfast meeting. He then says that someone came in and said to him, a plane's hit the World Trade Center. He said, this was his words, and about 15 minutes later, I felt a jarring thing. That was the Pentagon being hit on exactly the furthest away point from him of the Pentagon. By the way, where the Pentagon is said to have been hit was an area called Wedge 1, which had gone through massive building work to protect that one wedge from an attack like that. Just a coincidence, nothing to worry about. So if you take that Flight 77, the Pentagon was supposed to have been hit kind of about, 9:38, 9:40. You go back 15 minutes, you're at 9:25? He's saying that he's in his office at the Pentagon all the way through this, and only at 9:25 did someone come and say to him that the World Trade Center has been hit by a plane without mentioning the second one. And then, in 2004, Richard Clarke, the Bush administration terrorism advisor, counterterrorism advisor, wrote a book called Against All Enemies. And he described what happened to him that day. He says, as soon as he heard about the first plane, he's into the White House and he set up what he calls a teleconference with the Pentagon. And this was maybe about 9:10, not long after the second plane hit. And they had a teleconference link, and he had a teleconference link with the Federal Aviation Administration and with the Joint Chiefs of Staff in the Military Command Center at the Pentagon. And they were deciding what's going to happen. This is half an hour before the Pentagon is hit. Who does he describe on the screen at the Pentagon that he's having conversations with in terms of Myers? General Richard Myers, and Donald Rumsfeld. He wasn't on Capitol Hill at all. He was in the Pentagon. Why wouldn't he be there when there's war games going on? Rumsfeld was not in his office. He was at the command center, involving it. Richard Clarke describes how he had a conversation with Myers. He says, basically, are any planes up yet? And Myers is going, well, we're going to put some birds up, as he put it, as soon as we can. Well, how about now? So here you have the defense secretary, and there's more about this in the book, more detail. The defense secretary and the acting head of the military uniform level on 9/11 lying about where they were. But what's the common theme? We were not involved until the Pentagon was hit. Myers, someone said the Pentagon's been hit. Rumsfeld, I felt a jarring thing. Pentagon hit. Because there is no credible explanation except systematic delay and stand down that there were no military aircraft reactions to 9/11 before the whole thing had unfolded. None. So they had to give themselves cover stories. Liars. An absolute disgrace to America, a disgrace to all those people that died, a disgrace to their families, and a disgrace to the mainstream media who could have uncovered this a long time ago. You know that story I've just telling you? That one? That was in Alice in Wonderland and the World Trade Center disaster, which I published in 2002. Media that have covered that story, nil. It's unbelievable. But the idea is to, at a time when you're not supposed to say boo to anything, is to have some of that. Consequences, let me have them, because the truth is coming out and nothing's going to stop it. And thank you for the opportunity to talk about it, Brian, because this is absolutely what needs to happen. People need to hear this stuff.
It's my pleasure. Is there anything we need to say about Osama bin Laden?
Did you know that the Bush family, especially Father George Bush, who was not only a psychopath, he was a pedophile, torturer of children, which I've been writing in my books long before he died. Someone like that would care about 3,000 dead on 9/11 in New York. Are you kidding? He worked for a company called the Carlyle Group. The Carlyle Group had clients, the Bin Laden family. They were very close to the Bin Laden family, the Bushes. And on the morning of, across the days of 9/11, Bush was reported to be in a Carlyle Group meeting with members of the Bin Laden family. You'll remember that after a certain point, commercial aircraft were all grounded. Only military aircraft were allowed to fly.
Yeah.
Late that afternoon of 9/11, when all commercial aircraft were grounded, a 747 left, ironically, Boston Logan Airport with members of the Bin Laden family on board to fly back to Saudi Arabia. That same afternoon, when commercial aircraft were grounded, an El Al Israeli airline plane left New York with Israelis on board. Again, Saudi Arabia, Sabbatean Frankists, those that control Israel, Sabbatean Frankists. You see the connection. And like I say, wherever you look, there are unanswered questions and blatant untruths and suppressions of information.
And it's all covered in here.
All covered in here. Ironically, that's not the word, perhaps staggeringly, given that we've had this conversation of some length, it scratched the surface of what's actually in the book. Because not only is there a hell of a lot more to know about 9/11 and the lies and the way it was pulled off, because, we won't go into this now because it's in the book, but an Israeli company, an Israeli-controlled company called P-Tech, out of Quincy, Boston, had complete control of the computer systems of the American military, government, Federal Aviation Administration, NORAD, on 9/11, and were able to, in real time, to change what they were seeing and to block inter-department communications. The company, ICTS, or a subsidiary of ICTS, a security company, which was created by Israeli intelligence agencies and run by Israeli intelligence agencies, had the contract for plane and passenger security at Boston Logan Airport and Newark, New Jersey. Just a coincidence, nothing to worry about.
You keep digging, you just find more stuff. David, what do you want people to do when they read this book? I mean, like, what do you really want people to change about their perception?
The main thing initially is to rewire perception of the world and get rid of they would never do that. Because once you get rid of that and you see that they would do that, then so many other things becomes possible for so many other things that are going on but are far out to actually be accepted as perceptual possibility. But what we need more than anything in the reaction to this book is a demand, not least in America, that these people are brought to account to explain why they did what they did. Why did Michael Chertoff, as head of the criminal division of the Justice Department, let 5 Israelis go who were whooping and high-fiving over 9/11 and filming it, and 200 others in a spy ring in 2001, let them go back to Israel? How can Dominic Suter, who ran Urban Moving Systems, where the 5 dancing Israelis, as they were called, worked, how could he go back into America since and not even be questioned? Because there's a world that people see, and then there's the world that controls what people see. And once you realize that exists, that takes on a totally different perspective. And to understand how that works is to understand daily events, it's to understand where the world is going and the direction it's going, all this AI, all this censorship. And it's to see that what we need to do, please, whether Jewish or Muslim or Hindu or atheist or any of it, whether black and white and whatever, we need to put down the fault lines, because this death cult is dividing and ruling us. One of the reasons it brought Trump to power was to be the symbol of dividing America. That's why he was brought there. One of the reasons he was brought in. We've got to put the fault lines down and realize that if we don't stop fighting among ourselves, this death cult will meet its goal. But if we realize that we're being played off against each other purposely, so we're fighting among each other while the death cult's doing that and not being exposed. A situation where if you expose what's really going on, you are dismissed immediately as a conspiracy theorist. In other words, not to be taken seriously. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. That's not a conspiracy theory book. That's a conspiracy fact book. That's why, it's done at such length. When people say, okay, well, where's your evidence? Well, there you go. Have some of that. Evidence on an incredibly detailed level to prove that it's not a theory at all, it's a fact. And let the 18th anniversary of 9/11 be the day that the house of cards of this death cult started to unravel.
How can they get a copy of this, David?
Get it via davidicke.com. They'll get it within 24 hours.
It's called The Trigger. It is chock full of lots of stuff we didn't get into, lots of detail, as you can expect with the David Icke book, topping out nearly 900 pages. What's next for you?
Well, the next book, which already got on my mind, is it's about taking our power back. Because what this death cult wants us to believe is that we are powerless little me's. And it's the last thing we are. And that's a perception that has to be broken, because we're not powerless little me's. That's just what we are manipulated to believe, so that we will live out lives as powerless little me's for no other reason than that's what we've been manipulated to believe we are. So it will be a book about setting people free from powerless little me, to become the infinite enormity that we really are. And when that happens on any scale, the days of the death cult are over, because its whole foundation is perceptual control of the population, keeping us there. Once you start to do that, whoa, so that's what's going on. And the other thing about knowing who you are, that we are not our name, we are not our race, we are not our sexuality, they're just experiences. We are consciousness, infinite awareness, having an experience. And that consciousness can be as vast as or as tiny as we can be manipulated, or we can be released in terms of the expanded nature to be. And I can tell you that when you step out of the perceptual confines of your name, your race, your sexuality, and you see them as experiences, very transitory, brief experiences for your consciousness, then you step beyond the currency of control, fear, which is why I've written that book in no fear whatsoever of the consequences. And if anyone is to fear the consequences of that book, it's the death cult. Because I'm looking in your eyes, death cult, and I ain't blinking.
David, this has been epic. I really appreciate you coming on. I really appreciate you writing this book. And I appreciate your message, which is that we all need to become aware, get out of what you call the postage stamp mentality.
Yeah.
And it's the third episode you've been here at London Real, and it's always the theme. There is the what, but the why is always the same with you, and I really appreciate that a lot. And
It's a pleasure.
It's
been a real pleasure talking to you.
Always a pleasure.
I always say to people, Brian Rose is the best interviewer I've ever talked to, because he doesn't think it's all about him. He's not a Piers Morgan who will interrupt you halfway through a sentence because it's all about him. You ask relevant questions, you let people answer them, you ask another relevant question. That is the real art of interviewing, and I think you're absolutely superb, and what you're doing here is fantastic.
Thanks, David. I appreciate that. I really want to get the information out to people so they can make their decision. Like, that's what we're trying to do here. So I think that's why the style is appropriate.
Absolutely.
I just want to say to anybody who's watched this, if this has resonated with you, please share it with someone that you think might resonate with them. I'm expecting us not to get any type of love from YouTube. We appreciate YouTube, but they have actually come out and said that anything that even smells like a conspiracy theory, they won't allow it to propagate on their network.
I wonder why.
Yeah, and that's okay, you know, but we have enough people out there that want to hear this message. So if you're enjoying this, share it, let people know about it, so we can get as many people to think about these topics. And until next time, David.
Always a pleasure, mate.
Massive pleasure. All right, thank you, sir.
No problem.